So, mobile growth isn't about chasing the next breakout market anymore. Surprise! It's about paying attention to the markets that have already grown up. And these are markets like Korea, Japan, parts of Southeast Asia. They're amazing markets, they're growing, but they're also tough. And why are they tough? Well, for one reason, users are very demanding. And of course, competition is fierce. Lots of new, exciting companies. And the data tells us the truth, the hard truth. They're interesting and they tend to show what's coming next, whether that's how marketers respond to monetization trends or users respond to product. It's how growth teams use data. It's what good growth really looks like. So if you want to know what that looks like, you look at high maturity markets. So that is what we're doing. So today on All About Apps, that's exactly what we're doing. We are digging into the high maturity markets that can teach the rest of the world. And we're going to hear some great lessons around rewarded models, AI driven optimization, measurements, personalization. This is where teams are possibly reaching too high, but maybe also missing the mark. We'll find out because that's what we do here at All About Apps, right? We talk about these trends and we cover it with three experts who have very different but very complementary perspectives, some new faces as well. John Wright, you are a strategic advisor and one of the sharpest macro thinkers in gaming today that we know, probably why you're here to begin with. And from publishing and monetization to investment and industry trends, you have a front row seat on what's really working and maybe also what's overhyped. So we are lucky to have you here today. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Peggy. A pleasure as always.
Roy Nam, a new face and an exciting one because you are on the ground and you have worked with these teams directly, scaling across Korea, Japan, Vietnam. You're also CEO of AB180. That's the company behind Airbridge and Airflux. So, absolutely a leading voice in growth in these markets and importantly for us today, bringing insight into data, AI, and measurement, the topics that are so exciting. So we're excited to have you. Welcome, Roy.
Thank you, Peggy. It's great to be here as well.
And of course, Faheem Saiyad, my co-host, vice president at AppSamurai, partner in crimes. Faheem, great to have you again. You spend your days deep in rewarded models, user behavior, shifts, growth mechanics across regions. I mean, if there is a shift in how users are engaging, well, you are seeing it and you're going to tell us about it. So great to have you back again.
Good to be here, Peggy, John, and Roy. It's a pleasure. Excited to talk into this and share some more insights.
Absolutely. Let's get into it because this is the area. These are the markets. I mean, we talk about mobile. We say, yes, it's saturated, growth is slowing, and we have data that shows that, and that everything costs too much. Yes, CPIs are going through the roof. But high maturity markets, those are exciting. That's why this is just a great topic to start the year out with because it's where we see the hard truths earlier, right? They're showing us what works. They're showing us what works under pressure. These are highly competitive markets. And they're showing us what survives when users are demanding, competition is intense. Yes. So watching these markets, as I said, it gives us a preview into what's going to play out everywhere. Lessons here, it's where, what can I say? It is where sustainable growth really starts and really is. So I'll start with you, John, because that's what you're looking at. You've been talking about this across publishing, monetization, investment, and looking at the maturity, the mature market. You know, it sounds like a challenge. It could be an opportunity. What do you think teams misunderstand when they're talking about maturity and what it means for growth?
Oh, look, I mean, mature markets are the same as any established business or sector, Peggy.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter about what sort of industry you're in. If it's the oil or pharmaceutical business, you come to a mature market or a maturity in that sector, and eventually things become a little bit more difficult, and you're not going to get this double-digit growth. However, and look, mobile games and where we are now, depending on the region and the market per se, we are hitting maturity. Like, remember, the global gaming ecosystem economy was worth 197 billion in 2025, which was 7% CAGR, which the original projections from Newzoo at the start of the year was 4%. So we nearly hit or beat expectations by nearly 100%. A lot of this was broken down over PC console and mobile. Still grew by 3-4%, which is very, very sort of admirable for an industry that's been going for over 20 years. But again, whilst we're finding mature markets in the likes of the US and China and Korea and stuff, we are seeing pockets of high levels of growth. And Turkey has been a great example for the last 10 years. And Faheem's actually there now, and it's one of my favourite markets to visit, and I've got a lot of friends there. But then equally, I was in Vietnam a month ago,
Yes.
and I've been fortunate to have been working with the Vietnamese gaming industry since 2021, when they were in their infancy, and now these companies are earning 400-500 million a year for a market where the cost of talent is extremely low, and these are high profitability EBITDA businesses with very smart, talented people. And so yeah, look, there is obviously you get to a point of critical mass or slow growth, slow CAGR in any mature market. It doesn't matter if it's games or not, but there is always places and genres and other things that you can focus on to find that double digit, more exponential growth. You just need to know where to look. And people like me and studio heads and CEOs, we spend a lot of time analyzing and finding these areas where we can do that. So, there's always an opportunity if you look hard enough, basically.
Absolutely. I was also in Vietnam for the first time last year, and just fascinated not only by the growth. It is the one of the highest growth markets, but also the innovation there with AI is off the charts. So many companies using AI and also using data, which brings me to Roy, because the one thing about these markets that is so challenging, and why we look at them and not just pick up on the trends, but understand how we need to prepare, is because the users are demanding, right? They just do not forgive sloppy design. They want the best experience. And whether it's monetization or measurement, it goes through to that as well. These are demands for engagement design, and monetization design. What does it look like now, though, Roy? What is the demand for better design across the board?
Yeah, certainly. So I should definitely piggyback on what John just mentioned. So every market is being very mature. And of course, the highest maturity markets include like US, UK, Germany, and
Mhm.
all these like English speaking countries. But in this case, I can specifically talk about the APAC market because I'm coming from APAC, especially South Korea. And I can definitely say that most growth tactics that work in English speaking countries also work here in APAC, like in Korea and Japan. But what really matters today is, again, back to the basics, localized monetization and engagement design. So when I say localization, I'm really talking about maybe three things. So first of all is regulation. So when it comes to subscription and AI apps, for example, Korea recently introduced a very strict rules against dark patterns in subscription flows. So that's something quite unique to the local market, and you absolutely have to design around it. So definitely just making a quick research on a local regulation should be first step of localization. And second is, of course, the cultural behavior and cultural nuance. So, for example, if I'm to compare Korea and Japan, so Korean users are highly driven by FOMO, like social proof, like number one, most popular, biggest, largest. So all of these, metrics or the social proof has a huge impact on conversion, regardless of being gaming or apps, all included. Whereas, like Japanese users, on the other hand, they take much longer to decide to purchase. They need very detailed and trustworthy information before committing, like things like clearly listing every benefit and return they'll get from the subscription. So even for like games, for example, in order for Japanese users to finally make the in-app purchase, they'll need to know what they will get from this in-app purchase item. And maybe the last thing should be the language. So if you're just entering these markets, like machine translation is usually good enough to lower the entry barrier. We have all kinds of these LMMs out there, and you can easily do it. However, once you actually start seeing some traction, you really need someone on the ground to polish the wording, to like remove some awkward expressions and filter out anything that feels culturally off. So probably it's just a back to basic kind of thing. But I definitely want to emphasize the importance of localization, especially in APAC. And the combination of what I just said, like three things, is what actually drives results here.
Fascinating about those rules and regulations. And that is part of the experience. As you pointed out, you need to know this to design the product, to design the advertising. And that brings me to you, Faheem, because for the user, for the player, the ad experience and the app experience, they are one and the same. The ad experience is part of the product. What does this level of sophistication in these markets that we're talking about in APAC, what kind of pressure does that put on studios to work at delivering a much better ad experience?
Yeah, very good points by both Roy and John. One thing that both of them mentioned was, although global downloads are down like 5 to 7% since 2021, but the revenue in APAC is climbing at a very very high pace, right? I mean,
Yeah.
APAC alone represents over 45% of the global gaming revenue, and this is just from like 43% of the global downloads. Now, all of this comes down to the point that Roy exactly mentioned, right? It all depends on how exactly precise are you with your monetization. So in the tier one market, especially in the US and the West, there is a massive kind of run going on towards volume driven growth, and slowly moving towards precision monetization, which is something that Japan and Korea have been leading on. Less users, more high of an LTV, close to
Mm.
$60 in most RPG games, because again, as Roy mentioned, genre plays a massive role as well. The way you display ads to the user plays a massive role. Like in Japan, over 45% of the users actually check an app's rating on the store before they download the app. On an offer wall, I can show them 15, 20 different apps. The first thing they do is check reviews on the store, right? Because 60 plus percent of these users actually drop in reviews because they commit time to it, right? It's a cultural thing. So transparency is a massive thing, especially for these studios as well. So when they do localization, the way they approach these IAP bundles for these markets, because these markets, Peggy, as you know, are more IAP driven markets. Of course, in
Mm.
recent times, as John mentioned, in Vietnam, right, IAA or hyper casual, hybrid casual based games are stepping up into the game and trying to go global as well. But the main history comes from RPG driven narration. And that's where, as an advertiser, you have to make sure that, especially in the rewarded segment, where on an offer wall, you target the user, you show them how can they exactly earn through this particular game. It all comes down to your monetization. In the US market, for example, it is more like a trade. A user gives you their time, you as an advertiser pay them points or money to basically engage with the game. It's a happy situation. But in Japan, for example, it comes down to transparency. How often are you going to reward them? How often are the ads being shown to the user? So it all comes down to building trust. In Korea, for example, it's more of community driven, as Roy mentioned, right? So even when you think of these partnerships that these gaming studios are doing, it all comes down to where they want to reward the user, how do they want to convey the message to the user, localization being a big part of it, your monetization not feeling too predatory, especially with IAA based games like Tap Nation kind of scaling up in Vietnam and these other markets. We have seen them that the way they used to monetize users in the US is not the same as they would try to do in Japan and Korea. So that sense of mechanics also vary a lot.
That's a really important point because we focus so much on localization around the product. We've said, it's about cultural nuance, and even regulation, that was sort of a no-brainer, but the monetization models also need to match the markets. And we'll be seeing that in the trends and in the data. And so I come back to you, Roy, as being someone who's looking at data and measurement. We understand the human behavior, we understand the player behavior. What does that reveal about where mobile growth is heading globally? I mean, is there something we're seeing in the data or something you're seeing? It's telling us what maybe the other markets haven't been seeing yet.
Well, it's a really big question, and I think John and Fahim also you guys will have your own answers. But let me kickstart
Mhm.
first. So when you look at APAC, like especially China and Vietnam, well, through a data and a measurement lens, you can clearly see where like global mobile growth is heading next. And what I see as a major shift is that many gaming companies, especially those that used to focus on casual games, are now moving aggressively into consumer apps like subscription apps, utility
Mhm.
apps, and AI native apps. So when I visit the studios in Vietnam, on the one side, they're building casual games. On the other side of the office, they're building consumer apps. And these kind of trend is something that I actually spot a lot in China and Vietnam very recently. It doesn't actually mean that the casual gaming companies are giving up on the games, but instead they're actually evolving those hyper casual games into like hybrid casual games with UA diversification, more focus into data, BI, and PLTV. But on the same time, they're actually also investing heavily into consumer apps in parallel. And I
Mhm.
actually believe that consumer apps are becoming the next battlefield of mass production plus data driven optimization, and the line between apps and games is getting blurry here. So a lot of these consumer apps are now being designed just like games and operated like games with heavy experimentation, constant optimization, and tight monetization loops. And these are the things that we used to see in a casual battlefield, but they're now all being converted into consumer app tactics as well. So maybe before wrapping up my answer, there are two big emerging genres coming out of APAC that the rest of the world has seen but hasn't fully understood yet. Uh, and as like John mentioned, these genres could be a double-digit opportunity for
Mhm.
Western markets as well. So first is like, of course, the short drama apps.
Short
So
drama.
with this, uh-huh.
I was going to say that's really, really hot. And I've spoken with so many studios who are telling me in the West, right? That's what they're going to be doing this year as a side project or moving into that direction. So I was waiting to hear that. And that is the confirmation. That is what's next.
Yeah, I really believe so. Because like with just a couple of like exceptions, almost all of the top 30 short drama apps globally are built in China and
Mhm.
exported globally. The entire category was born there and is now being exported. And I think there's a huge potential to localize this genre much more deeply, especially like for English speaking markets. Um, and actually, another interesting genre that we see as emerging in APAC is AI virtual character chat apps. So in the
Yeah.
US, like we have players like Character.ai, but in Korea, this category has grown incredibly fast last year. Like apps like Crack, Zeta, and Lovey Dovey, they all exploded in 2025 with multi-million revenue in months. And now these spaces rapidly branching into like subgenres from like K-pop idols, virtual dating, subculture, story-based games, and like vertical simulations, even in religious sector as well. So overall, I just think that what we're seeing is like casual gaming, of course, is evolving into like hybrid casual, but also is getting branching out to the consumer apps, and also these kind of consumer apps built by casual gaming publishers follow the same playbook of data-driven growth, like UA heavy scaling and aggressive optimization.
Makes sense because it's a similar playbook for growth. But John, thinking about what Roy is telling us here and looking at it as an advisor, investor, I mean, are companies seeing these trends, learning from these markets, or are they still seeing it through their Western lens, forcing, the Western playbook on these growth trends?
Oh, I mean, if you're talking about East out, then I think the East are doing a far better job of understanding Western behaviors and Western users than we as the West are for the East. I think one of the things that Roy said earlier, which I was really nodding at, is like the culturalization, like just localizing the creative of a game does not mean that it will be culturally adopted by someone in Korea, right? There are a
Right.
number of different things. There's like different colors, different numbers, different things that you would never have. I think it's like the number 4 in China is super bad luck. So you would never have that have this sort of stuff there. And there's also, again, around the character design and a number of features and all this other stuff. But I think, to be honest, I think what Roy just said was on the money. The short drama is exploding. And again, all if you're not aware, that, again, as he said, it originates from China, right? And now we in the West are now thinking that we have come up with this. We haven't. this is this is something that is super Asian. We just are a little bit more arrogant. That I feel like we
But we
come up
are
with these
jumping on it.
ideas.
You can see that trend. You can see that that is something that more and more studios are speaking about.
But he's completely right. Look, I had a meeting yesterday with a good friend of mine who's been in the gaming industry, CEO of a gaming company for 10 years. The
Mhm.
last few years, he found it very difficult to pivot from hyper casual to hybrid and find a success. He's been working on a design app, an AI design app. So basically, like interior design. You have a room, you take a picture of it, and then you can put stuff.
Yeah.
And he's making like 200K a month as a solo dev
Hmm.
off the back of 10 years of gaming experience. And the thing that he is doing is systematic A/B testing, user acquisition excellence, understanding markability and optimization towards IPM and ROAS. And he is, the most success he's had in the last couple of years is now coming from a non-game, but he's used all of his experience to find success in that area. So it's
Yeah.
such an on-point trend.
And it's the mechanics. These mechanics work. And that brings me also to another mechanic, which is the rewarded mechanic, right? Because the models in rewarded, they're hot. They're everywhere. User response, as we've heard, that's not universal. That will be different. So what works really, really well in one market won't work perhaps in the other. Now, Faheem, when I think about what works where, I have to come back to you because you're deep into rewarded. Um, what are you seeing? I mean, how do user habits and expectations in Japan, Korea, and the Western regions we're talking, how do they differ when it comes to rewarded engagement? Because that's going to tell us how to build these strategies, as Roy said, for every market.
Definitely, one thing that is very, very in demand these days is the rewarded offer wall user acquisition.
Hmm.
Over 45 to 50% of the budgets are being spent on these channels. You get quick ROAS, and you get to do live ops that helps you design a certain journey, which leads to dedicated ROAS and retention rate. Now, one common mistake, as John and Roy both mentioned, is when game studios think of localization, they might just think of a theme or a character, for example, right? But what they also have to think of is how the users might respond. A simple example: the completion rate of levels, and this is something that we have seen in hybrid and hyper casual games, which have kind of been making a lot of money in the West. The completion rate in Japan and Korea is 2 to 3x higher than the US. Example: let's say level 20 takes, let's say, 3 hours to complete in the US or Germany. The same level 30 in Japan and Korea might take less than half of the time, or less than 20 to 30% of the time. So these kind of things directly tag into the ROAS. So if advertiser in the US is kind of globalizing the reward strategy and kind of giving the exact same rewards to the user in Japan and Korea, they will lose a lot of money, because the amount
Yeah.
of users that will complete these events, get these rewards, reach these levels, reach the milestones, will be way higher in Japan and Korea. So the copy paste strategy is something that many studios kind of once in 2025 they started expanding in Japan and Korea. They did this mistake of kind of copy and pasting the exact same rewarded tiers, same frequency, and they tried to globalize that. So that was a massive, massive thing that immediately affected the store reviews as well. Because when Western markets expect a rewarded ad based, it's like a give and take model. I give you my time, I take the rewards. But in Japan, it has to be low friction, right? Plus, you have to have these anniversary spikes. A lot of these cultural holidays, a lot of these seasonal offers make a lot of difference, especially in Japan and Korea as well. So you need to make sure that the frequency of rewards or rewarded videos or rewarded ads need to be adjusted accordingly as well.
Hmm.
Also, the opt-in nature of rewarded makes it much more easier, because unlike these other networks, when you are targeting via a rewarded app or reward offer wall, you actually take consent from the user. You consent to allowing the rewarded platform like AppSamurai to track you, to be able to give you those rewards. So this is a lot of advantageous aspects where you can leverage your AI models to see how many users opt in, after which levels are the users dropping off. In the
Hmm.
US, maybe the drop off rate after level 50 is higher. Maybe in Japan and Korea, the same drop off is seen at a level 70 or 80. So by taking these kind of data points from these rewarded aspects, you can actually design a customized journey from the users, because even that small behavioral notion can have a massive impact on your ROAS and your budgets as well. Because at the end of the day, the LTV of the users is high, but at the same time, the customer acquisition cost is quite high. The CPIs in Japan and Korea are
Yeah.
not tier 2 level CPIs. These are some really high level CPIs. And that's why kind of, copying a globally setup of rewarded into the Southeast Asian market or the APAC market is one of the biggest mistakes we have seen studios do.
Wow.
Mm.
Roy, that's a hard truth. Do you agree with Fahim here? I mean, is it the case that the data bears this out? We're hearing
Mm.
about you have to do your homework. It pays to make the effort to localize properly, whether that's the incentive size, frequency, reward structure. What does the data show us? How are those gains measured, and what are they showing us?
I definitely agree with Fahim. Actually, it's a really great insight because like as a Korean, I am also an avid mobile game player, and if I'm given the reward, I'll just like concentrate all my time achieving that reward and just reach that level, like level 20, level 30, as fast as I can in a most efficient manner. And definitely, what Fahim says is in alignment with the reality that we see here. And also, what Fahim said resonates with me is the seasonality and promotions. So when you think of these rewarded ads, you should definitely take into account all these seasonalities. Like for example, like in Western world, we think about Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year. Here, like we have a Lunar New Year. There's several other like local holidays, and even like for example like back to school days, like back to school, like maybe March, new semester, people will actually want to see those promotions like targeting those students who are going back to school. Summertime, like like all these vacations, all these things should be taken into account when you do the promotion. So you should think of these rewarding campaigns as if you're running live ops for your games. And if you actually take into account these seasonality and the local context, right, I think, as Fahim said, you can maximize the performance.
Very strong point. Think of rewarded like live ops. That's something that's really nails it. But John, are teams thinking like that? Are they understanding how rewarded can become like a design pillar? That it needs to be that it needs to be live ops, or are they still thinking, no, this is just a shortcut, this is a short-term win, this is not long-term engagement?
Oh, quite honestly, I don't think people are, Peggy. I don't think people are
Not
looking at it
thinking
from
that
that
way.
level of complexity right now. I think, again, going back to what Fahim and Roy both said, I agree that there has to be like a lot more substance behind it, a lot more thought process behind it. Um, the issue comes down to very simply studio priorities, resources, and other sort of bigger factors. If you're Scopely and you have 2,000 employees and you have like a dedicated rewards team, absolutely you're going to have this approach.
Mhm.
But look, rewarded campaigns, especially, I think again, Fahim will probably have a better idea. But I would say, depending on the studio, you're talking like 15 to 20% of the UA spend is associated to rewarded. So people are still, going and focusing on the lion's share. On your traditional video, and again your ROAS campaigns in app loving and all of the other stuff. And look, a year or so ago, rewarded was probably 10% of your UA breakdown. So it's probably gone up by 100% year over year in the last 12 to 18 months based on my projections. And there's a bunch of, if you go to any event, you'll see just an influx of people. When I was in Vietnam, I met with the Al Media Korea team. And there was three people from Korea in Vietnam from Al Media, two of which used to work for me at Luna and Unity. So, like there is obviously a huge global focus from a business perspective. There's many different companies all focusing on this. It is growing exponentially,
Yeah.
but and if you've not got a big enough team and resources, and it's not the lion's share of your revenue, you're not going to have the same level of in-depth focus that Fahim is talking about until it becomes that. So I think over the next 12 months, we'll see a bit of a changing factor.
Hmm.
People will start realizing this. Okay, it's not just a second thought. It's not just something that you go live and it will generate 10% more. It'll be okay. This is a strategy. This is something that we have to really, nailed down, especially if we want to succeed in Asia. And look, again, another point. Yes, like Korea has the highest RPD, revenue per download, of any country in the world. If you're playing, especially one of the big Korean IP games like Solo Leveling or Rise, you're talking 3-digit RPDs. So like every user is generating $100 plus, which is insane compared to what you'd think about the West. And that is why the CPIs are higher, because that's the nature of arbitrage. Like if something's generating $100, you can't pay $10 for it. It doesn't work like that. So these are the things that we need to start thinking about in a much bigger light. And it will either come from bigger teams, or it will come from higher focus as it continues to grow.
So that's really exciting. I'm going to deep dive into this for a moment, because what we're saying is that we've been looking at rewarded models and spending on them as a way to monetize. Next level, we'll be thinking about it the same way we design any monetization. We will start to think about this, as you said, Roy, live ops. That sticks with me. And if we're going to do that, then we have to deal with the problem of signal loss. We have everything else we need to be doing as teams. We have to think about scan, yes, MMM, probabilistic modeling, predictive LTV. There's a long list that we have to think about. So if we pull away from that, strip away the buzzwords, Roy, and think about the measurement, because it's one thing to implement this, it's another to actually measure the results. How do we need to be building that measurement stack to do well in these high maturity markets and understand that, yes, we have a live ops strategy, and yes, it's doing really well?
Yeah. Well, Peggy, I think you just mentioned MMM, and I actually was about to answer you with this topic of MMM. So
Mm-hmm.
actually, if you strip away the buzzwords, at the core, I still believe that the MMP and something like SKA network is very still essential. It's the foundation for running like multi-channel campaigns. If you want to run campaigns on AppSamurai, you would need the MMP. If you want to run campaigns on MLove and all these DSP channels, you would need the MMP. So it's still essential. But beyond that, what we can do more could be something like MMM and lift studies. So teams increasingly need more advanced like methodologies, like incrementality testing, using the platform like lift studies. For example, Meta has a lift study feature. Google has a conversion lift. So definitely you can run these lift studies time to time to really see if these advertising platforms are generating incrementality or not. And also on top of that, you can consider using marketing mix modeling like MMM.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, because of the advent of the AI coding, vibe coding, what really changed recently is that MMM has become far more accessible. So with open source like frameworks like Robin by Meta, Meridian by Google, like plus AI coding tools, even smaller in-house teams can now build some serious measurement MMM systems without massive data science resources. So although these MMM models, if you use it to the basic level, you can do all by yourself. But maybe if you want to really do it well, you can still, talk to these consultants or talk with some of the solution providers as well. So I actually believe that another thing that is interesting to see is the explosion of the creative volume. So because of these AI generated like UGC videos or like AI generated playables, or just display static images, we're already seeing leading gaming studios test anywhere like from 500 to thousands of ad creatives per title every month, which was not imaginable in a past. And that number is only growing up with all kinds of these new AI generated tools, AI generating tools out there. So at scale, what's problematic here is that because there's so many ad creatives, you will need a lot of budget for creative testing, and creative testing becomes tedious, very cumbersome, and even with MMPs, you cannot really look into 6,000 rows of these ad creative IDs. This is impossible. So that is the reason why many more technologies like creative clustering or creative audit tagging should be there in order for marketers to easily identify best performing creatives, and also the importance of PLTV is getting bigger because we really need to understand whether this creative will actually perform in the long run, not just in the first few days. And maybe lastly, an interesting event of the technology called synthetic consumer modeling can really help predict performance early on, so you don't waste budget on creatives that will never scale. In summary, I just think that MMP SK network become the foundation. On top of that, MMM can be utilized, lift testing can be utilized, and what
Mhm.
we're facing as a serious challenge here is the massive explosion of the AI creatives, and measurement players like us should be really coming up with the smarter ways to manage and optimize these creatives in the future.
I've just got to add some stuff to what Roy said because he said some really smart stuff and something
Yeah.
that I've been, as owner of a studio, something that I've been looking at a lot over the last year or so. Like the amount of AI tools that allow you to produce, countless creatives is very true. There is dozens of tools, and even the public ones, the big ones, your Soras, your VO3s, your Groks, etc., can produce some stuff. And there's a lot of tech out there now that's you used to only have to be able to generate 6 seconds, that's 8 seconds, that's 12 seconds, and then you've got some tech will stitch 12-second videos together to make a standard 25, 30-second video. But there has been a huge amount, an injection of slop. And by slop, I mean lots of so the thing is, Peggy, like years ago, we used to look at creative success based on the conversion. So it'd be like if our internal, like when I was at Quali, I had 40 people, 40 people making marketing assets every month in my marketing team, right? So over half of the marketing team was making videos, predominantly recording in Unity and custom scenes and all of that stuff. And we would look at the what their conversion was. But now with the influx of, and now we're doing 1,000 times more creatives, but we're finding that the conversion has dropped dramatically because we're putting so much stuff out there that is costing money, as Roy said. So every test is costing $10, $100, whatever, and you're testing a lot of stuff that's never going to be successful. So the synthetic play, what he just mentioned, is where I strongly believe we're going to be going. So synthetic very simply means you're testing it in a synthetic environment. It's a sandbox. So I'm testing 10 creatives, not on Facebook, where I'm spending, $50 per creative and burning $500 on slop. I'm putting in a synthetic AI sort of trained, a very data heavy trained model that says, based on all of this data set of all the information we have about you previously, we think that creative is the one you should spend money on.
Hmm.
And that will ensure that less creatives are tested in the open market, right? Which means that things like Facebook creative audience library isn't just completely overpopulated, and we won't waste as much money because we're probably spending two
Yeah.
three x more on creative testing, like as a budget, if not 5 or 10 times more now. So the synthetic point that Roy mentioned is definitely something that it's starting to appear and people are talking about, but I really believe it's going to help combat the increase and the sheer amount of creatives that are being developed, which are not very good.
What it gives us, though, is more signals as well, again, because now you have signal loss as far as the overall market. But Faheem, you're getting more and more signals because you're going to be testing the creatives as well. I mean, how does this look from the teams you're working with? How are they going to stay confident in data-driven decisions when there's so much signal at so many different levels? And now it's coming from AI that created the creatives in the first place.
Yeah, true. I mean, on top of what Roy and John already mentioned, right? It's all about how smart you approach the data. Because with AI, you can just enter a data set on Chat GPT, tell it, hey,
Mm,
give me a review summary. It's going to give you a review summary, and a junior intern is going to copy paste that into a management slide and be like, hey, here's the analysis. It's slop, as John mentioned, right? Without
mm,
knowing the context of the users, without knowing the context of the creative, without knowing the context of your cohort LTV curves, AI cannot do much for you, right? It's for lack of better words, right? A lot of people kind of obsess over, as I mentioned, right? I mean, high customer acquisition cost is not a thing if your LTV is disciplined. So as long as you're able to maintain that, optimization curves are much more easier to handle as well. Let's say you have the option of kind of in the rewarded world, for example, because that's where kind of we come out as well. We see a lot of people obsess over day zero and day one ROAS. because on an app 11, your day 0, day 1 ROAS, when you enter it into a BI tool, it will give you the curves for day 30, day 45, and so on. But again, right, the user set is different, as John mentioned as well, right?
Yeah.
The team is setting up custom live ops for a whole rewarded segment of users. So they also need to make sure that it's not just the creative that changes, the user behavior changes, and the data set changes as well. Data
Yeah.
set of users, the completion rate, completion time, ROAS maturity, retention rate, LTVs of an app 11 or a Unity platform will be way different than a rewarded platform curve, right? Because in this world, it's all about how do you reward the user and what's the LTV of the user as well. Of course, now with the introduction of AI, we are seeing a lot of dynamic rewards being become a standard, because you do know that if a certain data set of the users go past level 30 on day X, day 30, day 45, ideally you'll be able to break even. But on app 11, because the retention rate is so high, you can even break even after day 50 or day 60, right? So it totally depends on the dynamics as well. But basically, because you're able to do this kind of predictive churn models, that is a big aspect that the teams are still missing. But right, as John mentioned, if you're a Scopely or Product Madness or Dream Games that spend heavily on rewarded placements. By the way, John, one report I read did say that the rewarding spend has increased to over 35 to 40% for 2025, and for 2026 we are expecting it to cross over 50%
Whoa.
of the budgets, just because of the short return curves. A lot
Yeah.
of teams kind of entering into these debt financing and these platforms that let you kind of finance your UA campaigns. So
Yeah.
short term LTVs are something that they are seeing, and that's where they can control it as well. But unless you have a dedicated team, as John mentioned, it is going to be a tough hill to climb, because not every game is designed to be the same. There can be two hyper casual games for the exact same audience, exact same CPI, but just with the frequency of the ads, the way they optimize the data set, the way they optimize the live ops to show different ads at different placements, they could see completely different ROAS. And if you're not well versed in data, no matter what AI tool you use, no matter what subscription of these cloud models you have, you won't be able to make much sense of it.
I'd love to hear you respond to that, John. There's so much in there about the differences, but what you need to be watching. It's changed so vastly. There's so much more to be watching.
Yeah, look, I think again, even going back to the numbers that Faheem said he just saw, some report that said 35% for certain verticals or game genres and countries, probably is, and for certain studios, Product Madness, etc., definitely,
Yeah.
So there's always outliers and whatever else. So I believe I believe that what Fahim said is accurate. There's going to be certain situations and cases where this is much more bigger and much more impactful to the studios. But it also comes down to the team size and the allocation and responsibility, skill set. Because what we're starting to see now is like rewarded professionals, right? Like people that are actually dedicated, like
Yeah.
they've been in this space, they've worked at Misplay, they've done this, they've done that, and these people are starting to carve out a niche for themselves in our industry, right? So the same way that
Part,
you're seeing,
part of the experience. It's part of the experience.
the same way that everyone's kind of becoming like an AI engineer or AI prompt engineer, and everyone's like restudying MBA masters in AI. Certain people are learning and really fine tuning their experience and stuff in the rewarded space, and eventually when it becomes much more impactful, then you're going to start cherry picking the best talent that have the best impact in these particular areas. And the most important thing, I think, is what you said about the kind of user life cycle as well. So it's not just the reward that you give them to
Yeah.
get them into the hook, it's how you actually start doing like custom for TUI, right? Because like perhaps you don't want to have such a deep tutorial if you just want them to get straight to converting and completing the levels. So maybe a rewarded user, you don't want to create this extra friction of increasing the time it takes for them to get to their reward, right? Because you want them to scratch that itch. So what we start then talking about is like custom onboarding, custom for TUI, custom experience, even maybe at some point using like dynamic difficulty adjustments, a DDA, something very basic in game development. Maybe some levels will be tougher or easier, dependent if they're a come through rewarded UA or not. And these are all the things that, like, as we start getting more sort of robust AI implementation into games, these are the things that we'll start to be able to do very easily. Rather than having a team of engineers coding them, the AI will just say, based on the data points, these signals, these user behaviors, give them this experience. And like real blue sky thinking, I think in 5 to 10 years in PC console and mobile, we'll have completely bespoke gaming experiences. Like Roy and I could play the same game and we could have a very, very different even down to the gameplay itself, the
Mhm.
type. But he might end up doing a racing game, and it might be an FPS. The story will be the same, the characters will be the same, but the content will shift based on all of these different things. And I think that's like a much further down the line, but that's where I think we're going to end up. And AI application into rewarded where it is now. I think in the next year again, bespoke onboarding for TUI, all of this stuff. Will allow this to be much easier, and you won't need someone or a team to do it for you or build it. It will just naturally optimize towards it. So, let's see what happens.
It
Just,
is. It is
just,
exciting.
just a point to add here, Peggy, just on top of what John did mention, right? I mean, I love to play games as well. So, Split Fiction, John, is a game. It has
Mm.
exactly what you said. Two people play the exact same game, exact same dynamics, but they're very different, right? One is extremely modern, one is extremely in the ancient times. It's very parallel to what you say. So, as a developer, you design the exact same game mechanics, just the overall vibe is different, and there you have a whole different game here.
Mm. Dude, look, in the hybrid casual boom, probably from a couple of years ago, we used to build a game at Quietly, and then we would reskin it with 4 or 5, 6 different themes, right? Like one would be like, give you an example. One was a gym theme, one was an airport theme, one was a beach theme, and then we would go to Facebook and test all of the creatives using the different themes, and whatever had the highest markability, we would then apply that theme to the bare bones code, right? But it was still an idle hybrid, resources based game, like pizza by Supercent, one of the biggest sort of hybrid games ever. There's a bunch of people that have looked at that and changed it from a pizza shop to something else, but it's effectively the same thing, right? And sometimes these trivial, what we think are trivial changes in terms of the artwork or the style or the theme, actually can be tremendous in the retention of the user, of the markability, and eventually, again, AI will probably do all that testing for us. It will test like 100 themes, and then we're like, right, okay, that's a fully optimized game. Let's go to market.
And what we're talking about here is that same model is applied to the ad experience, the rewarded
Exactly.
experience. We're going to start skinning or seeing versions of rewarded experiences. And we're going to probably have to see teams that are running these as they would a live ops. And if you're a small team, well, that's where AI will come in. It will help you create that journey and it will help you measure the success as well.
Absolutely. I look. I don't think that companies are going to get bigger, Peggy. I think we're going to get smarter. Like as a CEO of a company, the base or the bulk thing I'm looking at the time, I'm looking at P&Ls, I'm looking at OPEX. People don't want to talk about this stuff in games because we, are passionate about the games, and that is our our passion and the artistic element. But quite frankly, games is still a business, and you have to run it as a business. And look, there's been a lot of layoffs in the industry over the last couple of years, and that's tragic. But equally, and people might not like me saying this, but we swelled companies too much, where they became financially unstable, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
So now I think our industry won't do that again. I don't think our industry will swell companies. I think we'll just become much more efficient, we'll become much smarter, we'll depend on AI much more, and smaller, leaner companies will achieve much more, and
Mm.
those companies will be much safer because financially speaking, they'll be in a better place. And look, 80% of your operating expense as a business is normally headcount, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, let's see. But then equally,
Mm.
the best thing about this is you'll also get lots of people branching off and splintering into new, smaller companies. Again, this is why like Vietnam and Southeast Asia are now really coming to play, because it isn't just about maybe historical experience or manpower. It's about ingenuity, scrappiness, smarts, and that's why Southeast Asia are blowing up and like kind of leaving a lot of the rest of the Western markets behind.
Yes, there's a lot of experimentation because it's small, because it's fast. And I want to stay here because we're talking about the future. And it's a great time to do it because here we are, beginning of the year, to look out to the future, to look forward. So, two questions I want to focus on. If you're advising a mobile app or game team planning the next 12, 14 months, what's the one change that you think is going to matter a lot that they might not be seeing, that they might not be planning for right now? And the other area is, where are they spending a lot of time and effort and budget that might not pay off where they expect? So I'll start with you, Faheem, because you work with teams, you're deep into what they're talking about, and they're deep into planning. So what is an answer to one of these questions, what they're doing today that may make growth harder and more expensive than they think?
Yeah, one thing that has been the topic of this entire conversation is, right, personalization, right? You cannot expect to
Yeah.
be generistic with your monetization, your growth strategy, the way you spend money, the way you test creatives. It all has to be very, very personalized based on data. So when we talk to the team, especially in 2025 end of the year, for this year's growth and strategy, one thing we did advise them was kind of, one thing this being very, very common, the underserved demographics are becoming like a big next growth frontier. Simple example, like merge games flooded
Mm-hmm.
the market in the past 2 years. It was basically dominated by female gamers. Female gamers love narrative driven experience, social mechanics, more fun creatives, as John mentioned, right? When you target this cohort of users, you will see really, really good purchase comebacks. All the merge games, the merge dragons, merge inn, merge hotel, merge restaurant, tons of merge categories that dominated and led to many of these acquisition of gaming studios were backed by these factors as well. I mean, this cohort of users played or delivered LTVs better than male dominated categories. Where male dominated categories come in real money games, we did see these hyper and hybrid casual games kind of, come around from a female perspective as well. Also, a lot of these studios now want to go global, right? As John mentioned, right? Vietnam seeing some massive acquisitions, but
Yeah.
they don't know how to do that. Same thing with Japan and Korea as well. So now all these, not every market might have extremely high, average revenue per user, but this doesn't mean they are low opportunity markets. Especially Vietnam, it's a very high download market, but of course, the average revenue per user is going to be lower. The way you compete here is basically you have a slightly lighter monetization model. You can't expect the exact monetization model from the US to work in Vietnam. So this is something that the gaming studios have to extremely focus on as well. And one final thing here is, I mean, the Chinese publishers are flooding the digital global space because of the domestic saturation and the regulatory pressure as well. This basically is creating a lot of competition for the Western market,
Yeah.
especially to kind of uplift their game of live ops. China does an excellent job of doing live ops, especially in the APAC market with the premium IPs. So that's where kind of the Western opportunities have a lot to learn, especially
Yeah.
focusing on retention and the way you would actually operate in a mature market like Japan and Korea, or maybe adopt a lighter monetization for a market like Vietnam.
Roy, whenever there's a question, the answer is always, well, it's in the data. Just test, look at the data. You look at the data. What's one thing in the data that maybe is telling us something that teams still aren't acting upon now? The data tells us a lot, but it's up to us to see it, to interpret it.
Well, Piggy, I actually just, listening to what John and Fahim said, I just totally agree with both of them. And especially on John's point that the team's just going to be smaller and leaner. And
Yeah.
then with the help of the AI coding and AI like agents out there, smaller teams can actually thrive. Smaller teams can do more. So certainly those things, those benefits that we could get in the past, like from like aggressive, proactive hiring and also like UA, the incrementality and the uplift that you can get from these motions will decrease in the future. But instead, I think the focus will be more on the actual live ops and personalized onboarding, personalized gaming experience that we call as like, from the wider angle, bigger live ops. So the reason why I think so is because, for example, just as Fahim mentioned and John mentioned, most teams barely use the advertising context that comes with the install. And those like ad touch points and signals that arrive with the user are either like ignored or used very lightly. So when user is coming from rewarded ads platform, we can actually naturally expect that these user will have a lower LTV. and maybe they have a lower willingness to make an app purchase. In that sense, you can actually lower down the price of the welcome package, make it more reasonable, more attractive to these rewarded ads, users coming from rewarded ads, and on the vice versa, you may actually want to increase the interstitial ad frequency, make it slightly higher than those users who are coming from TROS campaigns, because that naturally these users might actually show the lower LTV, so you need to make it for that trade off. So definitely, I just believe that that is where actually our company is doing with Airflux system. So we believe that a lot of these personalized contexts, personalized user behaviors, personalized like user attributes should be all reflected to the personalized onboarding, personalized game experience, ad experience, leading to higher LTV. And if you actually can optimize to that level where you can control all of these various digital variables inside the game design and make it in a way that it can maximize the user LTV, then that allows you the bigger room for the UA spending as well, leading to win-win cycle. So I just think that one thing that we see will rise is definitely more advanced live ops slash like personalization tactics in the industry.
It makes so much sense because that's money on the table. Those are signals we have. Just understanding how to interpret them, use them, and bring them back in. And now that we're understanding more and more about the link between the ad experience and what it tells us about the player, that comes together in something that maybe, John, and I'll give you the last word here on trends, it's it's something that teams can use to stay competitive. I mean, when you zoom out across the companies you advise, you're investing in, what do they need to get right to stay competitive? Maybe something in this new signal mix that they have to pay attention to.
Yeah, look, the personalization thing I've been talking about for the last 2 years.
True.
We, as an industry, thought that segmentation was good enough. Segmentation being buckets. So we will put like 1,000 people into the same experience with the same value, economics, whatever you want to call it. But my belief is for us to get them the absolute optimal results for our games and maximize the amount of money we can earn or give the best experience we can to our users. Personalization has to come first, and I'm seeing already advancements in AI that will start based on user behavior data and modeling will start to give different offers, different price points, and different sort of economic values of different welcome packs and stuff like that. Roy, it said that that's already happening in the industry. I think the next level of personalization again is coupled with AI, and it becomes with a personalized experience, as I spoke about earlier. I think that we will eventually could have two different core mechanics in the same game in mobile. Like one might be it might be as simple as match 3 and match 3D, or it could be emerge and match. But like eventually games will start becoming bigger ecosystems, and it will be all about retaining people rather than the arbitrage of UA and monetizing them and then putting them out. It will be about how do we build these walled gardens. Everyone's looking at Roblox and looking at these concurrents, 22 million concurrent players in brain rot. And like this is, and I know that what they're doing in that part of the industry versus what we do in mobile is very different, but there will be a convergence at some point, right? Like I believe again over this year, and maybe I was a little bit early, but I absolutely loved Genshin Impact. I adored it. I played it for such a long time. I was playing it on my mobile, and then I was going home and I was playing it on my PS5. And that is the future of games for me. It's accessibility to users. It's giving people the ability to play on the go or at home, different levels of quality, different levels of gameplay, simplistic as adding simplicity to mobile, so I can do the same thing. Whereas when I'm on PS5, I want to have a much more ownership and much more difficult controls. And I think, especially in Asia, this is been a trend for a while, and I think in the West we'll start to see more mobile versions of games and more trans-platform sort of games, and that's my hope anyway, Peggy, because I think it's just the best for the users
And best for the market. Well, there's a lot to unpack there. There's also a lot of good news and good advice because we've started with the mature markets, how they're evolving, what teams need to be thinking about, and growth and monetization, how that all comes together in 2026. And it's going to be exciting. There's going to be more to do because just as there might be a game for every type of player, there's going to be an ad journey as well. And we're wanting to be listening to this, how this evolves, and planning beyond Q1. So I want to thank you, John, Roy, Faheem, giving us a bit of a playbook for Q1 and beyond because it is a tough time, but you've done a great job giving us your different perspectives. Thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Peggy. It was great to be here.
I think we've got a really valuable playbook. We've got some great ideas for the new year and some positivity, which is what we always need. So to everybody listening in as you plan Q1, take notes. This was a very valuable episode because it tells you where you can go, signals you can be looking at that will give you better clues to where to take your game and your strategy in 2026. And of course, finding out where to take it next, well, that's what we're here for. So stay tuned to All About Apps. And don't forget, subscribe. We'll see you in the next episode. And everything you want is in the show notes.